sharing something, a vulnerability, a trauma with someone that I thought I trusted, and then they were then able to use it against me as a weapon to hurt me. I thought...
For almost 10 years, Valerie Bertinelli was one of the most recognizable faces on the Food Network, the kind of host audiences invited into their kitchens every week without a second thought. Then, in the span of a single text message relayed through someone else, that decade quietly ended. No farewell special. No on-air goodbye. Just confirmation, delivered secondhand, that she would not be coming back. To understand how someone with 2 Daytime Emmy Awards and a 14-season hit show ends up finding out about the end of her own career through a third party, you have to look past the headlines and into exactly what was happening, both inside the network and inside Bertinelli's life at the same time. Bertinelli's path to the Food Network was anything but an accident born of desperation. Born in Wilmington, Delaware in 1960, she grew up moving constantly because of her father's job with General Motors, eventually settling in Los Angeles by the time she was a teenager. At 15, she landed the role of Barbara Cooper on the sitcom One Day at a Time, a role that earned her 2 Golden Globe nominations and introduced America to the warmth that would define her entire career. She built decades of steady work after that, including a run on Hot in Cleveland and a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, long before anyone associated her name with cooking. When she eventually moved into food television, it read less like a pivot and more like a continuation of the same skill she had always had, making people feel comfortable watching her. She joined the Food Network in 2015 with Valerie's Home Cooking, a show built around exactly that comfort. There was no competition format, no elimination round, no manufactured tension. It was Bertinelli cooking dishes tied to her own life and family, talking to the camera the way she might talk to a friend in her kitchen. The show ran from 2015 until 2023. That same year, she also signed on as co-host of Kids Baking Championship alongside cake artist Duff Goldman, a competition show for young bakers that ran for years and became one of the network's reliable mainstays. Bertinelli has co-hosted and judged Kids, a spin-off of Food Network's larger baking championship competition franchise, alongside Duff Goldman since it first debuted in 2015. In 2018, Food Network signed Bertinelli to a multi-series exclusive deal, which expired in 2021. The pact was extended for an additional year and came to an end in 2022. That contract expiration is where the actual story begins, and it has very little to do with Bertinelli's performance, and a great deal to do with what was happening several floors above her in the corporate structure. In April 2022, Discovery Inc. completed its merger with Warner Media, forming Warner Brothers Discovery, and the financial and editorial pressure that followed reshaped decision-making across every network under that umbrella, including the Food Network. According to insiders, the choice not to renew Bertinelli's deal in 2022 was made by development executives who no longer work at the network. Former President Courtney White exited Food Network in March 2022 ahead of the close of the Discovery-Warner Media merger, followed soon by her replacement Jane Latman in December 2022. In other words, the very people who had built a relationship with Bertinelli and understood what her presence meant to the network's identity were gone before the decision about her future was even finalized. The leadership that replaced them had no particular investment in deals the previous regime had signed, and Bertinelli's contract simply expired into that vacuum. What makes this more than a routine business story is how it actually played out for her. Bertinelli's longtime manager, Mark Schwartz, told Variety, her deal expired, they opted not to renew it. They could have come to me with an offer just for Kids. They never did. Simple as that. Valerie's Home Cooking ended quietly. But Bertinelli kept appearing on Kids Baking Championship because episodes already filmed continued to air well after her larger contract had technically lapsed. Season 12 of Kids Baking Championship was taped back-to-back with Season 11 in the summer of 2022, when her multi-series deal came to an end. That detail matters enormously, because it means Bertinelli spent those filming days not knowing, in any official capacity, whether she had a future at the network at all, And those filming days happened to fall during what Bertinelli later called the hardest stretch of her personal life. In October 2020, Eddie Van Halen, her first husband and the father of her only child, died after a long battle with cancer. The two had divorced years earlier but remained close. And Bertinelli has described that loss as devastating precisely because the relationship had evolved into something resembling a deep friendship by the time he died. At the same time, her marriage to financial planner Tom Vitale was unraveling. Bertinelli was going through her divorce from ex-husband Tom Vitale during the summer of 2022, a period she described as her apex year of hell. She filmed an entire season of a children's baking competition, requiring patience, warmth, and on-camera composure, while privately managing grief over one marriage's end and the painful dissolution of another. She later said, "Without sounding like a drama queen, the show saved my life. So when the actual confirmation finally arrived more than a year later, the manner of it landed especially hard." According to her own account, she was basically ghosted by the network, claiming to have heard the news of her firing from a third party. She confirmed it in an Instagram video in January 2024, saying, "I've been avoiding facing what I got confirmation of last night, because it really hurt my feelings." She was careful, even in her hurt, to separate the emotional impact from the business reality. She said plainly, "Logically, I know it's business. Budget cuts, right? But it really hurt my feelings to know that I'm not going to be asked back to be on Kids Baking Championship. It really sucks." There was no accusation of wrongdoing, no claim that she had been pushed out for cause. Just an honest acknowledgement that a decade-long professional relationship had ended through the most impersonal channel available, and that the impersonal nature of it stung regardless of the underlying business logic. The reaction from her audience told its own story about what the network was actually trading away. Fans and former colleagues responded with genuine frustration. And the moment that crystallized the broader sentiment came a few months later, in April 2024, when a food blogger posted on Threads lamenting the disappearance of straightforward, educational cooking shows from the channel. The post began, "I miss actual cooking shows on our Food Network. Remember those?" Bertinelli responded publicly, agreeing that something real had been lost in the network's pivot toward competition formats. And the response resonated because it named something many long-time viewers had been feeling but had not seen articulated. By someone who had actually lived through the shift from the inside. That shift had been building for years before Bertinelli's contract ever became an issue. The Food Network built its identity in the 1990s and 2000s on teaching people how to cook, with hosts like Ina Garten and Alton Brown anchoring a relationship between viewer and network built on trust and knowledge transfer. Over time, competition formats proved cheaper to produce and generated stronger short-term ratings, and the network leaned harder into that model. An educational cooking show requires a skilled host, a tested format, and real production investment in teaching technique. A competition show requires a kitchen, a clock, and a panel of judges. As the post-merger Warner Bros. Discovery leadership looked for ways to cut costs across its portfolio, the math on which kind of programming to keep was not particularly complicated, even if it meant losing exactly the kind of personality-driven trust that had made Bertinelli's shows work in the first place. It is also worth being precise about what actually happened here, because some retellings of this story blur an important distinction. Bertinelli was not fired in the traditional sense of being removed mid-contract for cause. Her departure was the aftermath of Warner Bros. Discovery deciding not to renew her larger exclusive deal with the network when it ended in 2022. Her contract expired, and the new leadership simply chose not to extend it or offer a smaller deal covering Kids Baking Championship alone, despite having that option available. That is a meaningfully different story than an abrupt termination. Even though the emotional experience for Bertinelli, learning the outcome secondhand more than a year after the fact, looked and felt a great deal like one. What happened next showed that Bertinelli had no intention of disappearing from public life simply because one network had moved on from her. By the spring of 2024, she had announced a new relationship and continued working on a cookbook and other projects. signaling that her career and personal life were both moving forward on her own terms rather than being defined by the network's decision. The audience that had shown up for 9 years of her cooking shows did not vanish along with her contract. If anything, the strength of the public reaction to her departure, including support from other celebrities and an outpouring of frustration from longtime viewers, demonstrated that the loyalty she had built was tied to her personally rather than to the network that had employed her.